watching World Report on NewsX World. Let's take a look at the top headlines of this hour. The US and Ukraine have said that they have drafted a refined peace framework in Geneva to revise an earlier plan criticized as too favorable to Russia, with both sides committing to intensive work before a Thursday deadline. Meanwhile, the White House has said that the updated plan meets Ukraine's strategic requirements amid ongoing questions about security guarantees for Kyiv, as Secretary of State Marco Rubio leads the U.S. delegation. Russian forces have staged a massive drone attack on Kyiv, Ukraine's second-largest city, killing 4 people and injuring several others. Rescue efforts for people trapped in the rubble are still underway. The Israeli military has released a video claiming to show the strike that killed Hezbollah's top military in the southern suburb of Beirut, despite a U.S. brokered truce a year ago. The strike, the first on the outskirts of the Lebanese capital in months, has targeted Iran-backed Hezbollah's acting chief of staff, Ali Tabtabai, the military has said in a statement. French President Emmanuel Macron has met with his counterpart Brice Oligui Nguema from Gabon in Libreville. The two leaders reaffirmed their commitment to a reinvented partnership following bilateral talks. Chinese Premier Li Qiang has urged German Chancellor Friedrich Merz to adopt a rational and pragmatic China policy, calling on Berlin to prioritize shared interests during their meeting at the G20 summit in Johannesburg. The talks signal a move to repair strained ties after German Foreign Minister postponed his China visit due to lack of high-level meetings. Indonesia has introduced the Global Citizenship of Indonesia GCI permit, allowing former Indonesian citizens to live and work in the country indefinitely as a substitute for dual citizenship, which remains illegal under national law. The policy is modeled after India's OCI program. It applies to adults who must otherwise choose a single nationality at the age of 18. More than 11,000 people in 7 Malaysian states have been affected by flooding caused by torrential rain. A report from the National Disaster Management Agency showed 11,009 people from 3,839 families were being affected by flooding as of 6 a.m. local time. Now we start with US and Ukraine. The United States and Ukraine have pressed on with talks in Switzerland to come up with a mutually acceptable peace plan after agreeing to modify a US proposal that Kyiv and its European allies saw as a Kremlin wish list. According to a joint statement by Washington and Kyiv, they have drafted a refined peace framework after a first day of talk in Geneva. Although they did not provide specifics, previously, the United States blindsided Kyiv and European countries with a 28-point peace plan, giving Ukraine until Thursday to agree to a framework to end Europe's deadliest war since World War II. Although after the first day of talks, no public statement was released on how the revised plan would handle contentious issues such as how to guarantee Ukraine's security against future threats and how to fund the rebuilding of Ukraine. Now for this discussion, we welcome Gilbert Doctorow. He's a Russian affairs expert, joins us live from Brussels. Thank you very much for joining us again. Good to see you. Now, so far, what do you think, what changes have been made on this, and what do you think is challenging for Russia, Ukraine, and US to find a common ground?
The attempt by the Europeans in particular to change the nature of the plan from one which represents the real forces on each side of the belligerency to capture the reality that the Russians have won this war and the Ukrainians have lost it. That aspect of the 28-point plan is what the Europeans are trying to water down or eliminate. There have been rumors, the Financial Times today had some of these rumors on what the Europeans were aiming at. One of them is precisely this question of the disposition of the frozen assets, Russian state assets, frozen in Euroclear and in Belgium, and otherwise frozen in countries like France and the United Kingdom. The peace plan posed by Trump spoke about half of that amount being made available to a redevelopment fund that would be overseen by the United States and specifically by Mr. Trump. It only just described this in neutral terms to restore infrastructure and to invest in development of the Ukrainian economy. What the Europeans want is to turn this into a reparations payment that would be confiscating the Russian state assets to constitute a reparations allowance, which they would then give to Ukraine. The problems with that are double. One, the winning side does not pay reparations to the losing side. That's a contradiction in concepts. It is effectively a denial by the Europeans that Russians have won the war and the Ukraine has lost the war. This condition, if it is continued and taken up for discussion with Russia, will be the death of the peace plan. The Russians, under no circumstances, will accept the confiscation of their state assets to be called a reparations to Ukraine. Otherwise, territorial issues. We may expect that the Ukrainians have, with support from the Europeans, have tried to eliminate any loss of territory or the recognition of Russia's indefinite possession of the Donbass and Crimea. If that is reflected in the revised plan that has been agreed, we may assume between Rubio and Yermak, representing the Ukrainians, then that is also a kiss of death for this peace plan. I would call out that Mr. Rubio is playing a double game here. I do not expect that he will remain Secretary of State after January 1st. He is saying one thing in front of Mr. Trump, and he is saying something very different when the doors are closed, as we understood from Senator's remarks on his meeting with them in Canada on his way to Geneva on Sunday. If this was true, then he is talking out of both sides of his mouth, and he cannot remain Secretary of State for more than a few weeks.
And while we know that the U.S. delegation in Ukraine discusses peace talks, the war still goes on and escalating. How do you think these will affect the peace talks without any enforcement in place, and how effective will be whatever comes out of these talks? Do you think it will be effective?
If the plan, something close to the plan that was made public last Friday, the 28-point plan, is carried forward and presented to the Russians, then the war will stop in a few weeks. It'll only depend upon the speed with which the Ukrainians begin withdrawing from the parts of Donetsk that they now occupy and the Russians have not yet conquered. The notion that the war will proceed, the Russians will proceed extremely slowly in taking Donetsk is based on a fallacy. The Russians have taken a long time to get where they are because they were overcoming the most heavily fortified territory in Europe since World War II. The Ukrainians, with British and other European assistance, had created a network of very strongly fortified cities, which the Russians could not just bomb into non-existence because the civilian populations there were considerable and mostly were Russian-speaking. Those fortified towns are on the point of collapsing. What remains between Russia and the Dnieper River is a flat plain with very few fortifications. So the war will end very quickly to the point of the Dnieper River. What happens after that remains to be seen. But I can say that if the Russians reject the revised peace plan, the war will go on unabated, and the Ukrainians will lose tens of thousands of more soldiers. The Russians will lose a few thousand more soldiers, all of which is very sad, tragic, and unnecessary, because the outcome is perfectly foreseeable today.
Right. With that, I would like to thank Professor Gilbert Doctorow for joining us today as a Russian affairs expert from Brussels. Thank you very much. Now, moving on to Middle East, Hezbollah has confirmed the death of senior military official Ali Tabtabai following an Israeli airstrike in the southern suburb of Beirut. Hezbollah leadership says it will decide on whether and how the group will respond, raising tensions in the region. The group mourns Tabtabai as a great jihadist commander who dedicated his life to confronting Israel without revealing specific details about his role. The Israeli military says the strike targeted Tabtabai, acting chief of staff of the Iran-backed group. This marks the first attack on Beirut's outskirts in months, despite a U.S.-brokered truce last year. Hezbollah official Mahmoud Kamati has said that the strike crosses a red line and took place in Harek Hireik, a well-known stronghold. Now for this discussion, we welcome Muhammad Osman. He's an international relations expert, joins us live from Cairo. Thank you very much, Muhammad, for joining us again. Good to see you. Now, of looking at all this, do you think, what do you think of how the truce is holding up, US-backed truce? It's been a year almost since it was brokered in November last year. And how do you think this Mr. Ali Tabtabai's killing will affect? Do you think that will lead Iran to react to his killing?
Thank you for having me, Shuma. It was a pleasure to be with you. Of course, what's going on in Lebanon, as we have said before numerous times on your kind broadcast, that it has been a one-sided ceasefire. The Lebanese side, Hezbollah, and other factions have been upholding their commitments and obligations under the ceasefire, complying with these provisions, dismantling their infrastructure in the southern Lithuania River as dictated by the ceasefire agreement, which was mediated by the United States back in November 2024. Yet Israel has chosen to incessantly violate the ceasefire over the course of a year, carrying out incursions, maintaining the occupation of 5 strategic points inside Lebanon along the blue line, which is the border between Lebanon and Israel. And also they carry out basically now almost daily airstrikes, causing the death of about over 350 Lebanese in the past year. And of course, now they have engaged in a very sharp and dangerous escalation with the assassination of Hezbollah's military chief, Haytham Ali Tabtabai. Tabtabai is a very pivotal figure in Hezbollah's military apparatus. He is basically the military chief of staff of the organization, its military commander, and his predecessor, Fuad Shukr, was assassinated also by Israel in the summer of 2024 in the prelude to the all-out war between Hezbollah and Israel, which is an indication that things might be moving in the same direction. Again, that Israel once more is electing to carry out the assassination of high-ranking members and the key leaders of Hezbollah in order to pave the way for a possible open conflict with the organization once more. And of course, Israel's pretext behind this is that Hezbollah is regrouping and is rearming, and it has provided zero evidence to support that, actually, whether Israel or the United States. And also the Trump administration and Israel have been pressuring the Lebanese government to disarm Hezbollah, something which is not feasible to be undertaken haphazardly or so rapidly, because it would basically lead to a civil war in Lebanon. Hezbollah is one of the major components of the Lebanese political spectrum, and it is a representative of the Shiite religious community in Lebanon, which constitutes about 30% of the population. And as you very well know, Asuma, Lebanon's political system is a confessional political system where there's a power-sharing agreement between the different sects So when a certain component is being threatened and singled out in order to be persecuted one way or the other, even for the sake of disarmament, this could lead to civil war. So therefore, the Lebanese government has been very reluctant in confronting Hezbollah. So now the alternative is, okay, Israel will do the job and it might actually invade Lebanon again and carry out a massive military operation to destroy whatever is left of Hezbollah's capabilities. So unfortunately, we are on the cusp of a potential sharp escalation in Lebanon, Asuma, that might lead to an all-out war within the next few weeks. I hope this doesn't happen, but it seems to be that the indicators are heading that way.
And Osman, I remember you mentioned that, you also mentioned that maybe something similar could happen with Iran in a few months. Why do you think Hezbollah has not retaliated to continuous Israeli attacks despite US brokered ceasefire a year ago? Do you think it's waiting for Iran to back it more or something?
Yeah, of course, for three main reasons. And before I get to those three main reasons, of course, Hezbollah is an Iranian proxy, so it would never take any such step without consultation with Iran, or even rather without the permission of Iran. And there are three major factors that prevent Hezbollah from responding or retaliating. So far, the first one is that Hezbollah has been severely weakened in the last round of fighting with the Israelis. It has lost its historical leadership, including Hassan Nasrallah, its phenomenal leader, and also its capabilities due to the pager attacks and also the Israeli bombardment and the Israeli invasion. The military infrastructure has been decimated. They lost much of their heavy weapons. They lost thousands of fighters, and especially from the Radwan force, which is the elite fighting unit of Hezbollah's military branch. So as you can see, they were basically defeated militarily in the last round of fighting, and it's quite doubtful that they have managed to regroup and reconstitute their forces within the span of a year. The second factor is that the Assad regime in Syria has fallen, which means that their key ally in Syria and the land bridge between Lebanon and Iran, by which Iran supplied Hezbollah with weapons and funds, now ceases to exist. There now is a regime in Syria that is very hostile to Hezbollah, and also the 12-day war against Iran. Iran itself has been severely weakened by the Israeli-American war against it back in the summer of 2025. And I think that Iran is very eager not to engage in any confrontation that could lead to another confrontation between it and Israel at this point, even though they would rather sacrifice Hezbollah in a war by proxy with Israel than actually jump into a direct war with the Israelis. So I think that Hezbollah at this point will not be very eager to retaliate against Israel. However, Israel wants Hezbollah to retaliate and respond, and they will keep provoking Hezbollah so that they would respond at some point. And of course, this will be used as a pretext to initiate maybe a larger military campaign against Lebanon by the Israeli occupation.
Yes, very typical of Israel indeed. Thank you very much. With that, I would like to thank Mohammed Osman for joining us as an international relations expert and sharing that insight from Cairo. Now we move on to Asia. China has criticized Japan over its decision to proceed with the deployment of missiles in Yonaguni Island, a Japanese territory near Taiwan. Japan's Defense Minister Shinjiro Koizumi has confirmed that the deployment of Type 03 medium-range surface-to-air missiles was on track, aimed at strengthening defense against potential attacks. Beijing has accused Tokyo of deliberately escalating regional tensions and provoking military confrontation, particularly following Japanese Prime Minister Sanai Takaichi's comments, suggesting that Japan could intervene militarily in any attacks on Taiwan. China's foreign ministry has warned that these developments were extremely dangerous and called for increased vigilance from neighboring countries. Let's listen in.
中国台湾邻近的西南诸岛部署进攻性武器，刻意制造地区紧张，挑动军事对立。联系到日本首相高市早苗的涉台错误言论，这一动向极其危险，需要引起周边国家及国际社会的高度警惕。
Taiwan has supported Japan's move, stating that the missile deployment was beneficial for maintaining security in the Taiwan Strait. Taiwan's Deputy Foreign Minister Wu Chi-chung has emphasized Japan's sovereign right to defend its territory and noted that Japan's actions do not pose a threat to Taiwan. Now for this discussion, we welcome Mr. Andrew K.P. Long. He's a China strategist, joins us live from Hong Kong. Thank you very much, Andrew, for joining us again. If you can briefly let us know why Taiwan sides with Japan continuously.
Well, Taiwan wants to use Japan's revisionism to further its momentum towards a degree of independence under the leadership of this quite notorious separatist who has a long record of moving the island towards a greater degree of, within quotation marks, independence. But this coincides with the emergence of the first female prime minister, who is also a known anti-China hawk and also represents the Japan's revisionist forces who want Japan to change the wartime constitution to enable Japan to rearm itself as a normal country, to project its military power in the region and perhaps around the world. And that, of course, raises the specter of Japan's past invasion of China, and of course, Japan's aggression in the Second World War, starting the Second World War. Not least is also exacerbated Japan's absence of apology for its war crimes in China and elsewhere. It's never apologized for what Japan did for the Second World War, unlike West Germany's former chancellor, who very quickly after the end of the Second World War knelt down in silence, apologizing for the Nazi crimes. But that's not the same as in the case of Japan. Japan has never apologized. And so that's why there is a national kind of reaction to what Japan is doing now, and hence this pushback against Japan.
Right, and Andrew, like you mentioned, Japan's reaction and this pushback of Japan's missile deployment on Yonaguni Island. Looking at the reactions from China and Taiwan, what do you think this reveals about competing security priorities of them, and to what extent is Japan's decision a defensive measure versus a perceived escalation?
Let's not forget that even in anticipation of the ascendancy of this lady prime minister, who is known to be a revisionist, the United States withdrew its mid-range missiles from Japan's soil only a couple of weeks ago, so as to forestall the possibility that these mid-range missiles deployed in Japan, American missiles, could be used to start a war with China, because these mid-range missiles could reach Beijing and Shanghai. But now the Japanese government is now deploying missiles. These are surface-to-air missiles of much shorter range, but nevertheless, that represents a escalation, because the deployment of these missiles on a pretext of national security, linking it to Taiwan, begs the question that Taiwan is 1,400 miles away from Japan, or 2,400 kilometers away. So how is that a crisis situation in Taiwan would immediately trigger national security? Japan seems to stretch the point a little bit too far, and that's why the Beijing is now responding in the way it's doing.
Yes, indeed. With that, I would like to thank Mr. Andrew K.P. Long for joining us as a China strategist from Hong Kong. Thank you very much. Now we have a breaking news. In a statement from Luanda, German Chancellor Friedrich Merz has addressed the recent Geneva peace talks, highlighting that while some issues were clarified, he acknowledged that achieving peace in Ukraine would not be an immediate process. Merz has emphasized that that the talks had made progress towards a jointly developed peace plan, a goal that has been expressed by US President Donald Trump. The German Chancellor has also stated that Europe must give consent to any Ukraine peace plan. Now we move on to Asia. Southern Thailand faces severe flooding after days of heavy rain, with Songkhla province hit the hardest. Authorities have started urgent evacuations and deployed disaster units to help communities. Songkhla has been flooded since November 19th, worsening from Utapao Canal for tape overflow and heavy upstream runoff, as all 16 districts are affected, impacting 115 sub-districts, 821 villages, and 167 communities. According to reports, over 243,000 households, more than 635,000 people have been affected, and only one person has been killed, and over 1,200 people have been evacuated. Now we move on to Europe. Slovenians have rejected in a referendum a law that allowed terminally ill adults to end their lives. After critics mounted a campaign against the legislation, about 53% of 1.7 million eligible voters voted against the law that proposed legalizing assisted dying. As per the preliminary reports released by election authorities, the results mean the law's implementation will be suspended for at least a year. Slovenia's parliament had approved the law in July, allowing assisted dying after a 2024 referendum supported it. Under the disputed law, terminally ill patients would have had the right to aid in dying if their suffering was unbearable and all treatment options had been exhausted. Let's in fact listen into what the Slovenians had shared.
Referendum še malo politično sporen, oziroma ni še vse določeno in napisano, kar bi moglo biti, tako da mogoče ni to stvar za uzakoniti, tako da je izbira vsakega. Tako da je čisto v redu, tako kot je moglo biti, tako da po moje bojo mogli še malo dodelati tale zakon oziroma.
Nisem zadovoljen, nisem pa zelo pretresen. Jaz sem glasoval za, ker to, kar pravijo, da je zmagalo življenje, je smešno, ker noben mu nič noče, lahko bi mogoče kakšnim, ki imajo probleme, olajšali pot na drugo stran, ampak
Jaz sem zadovoljna, jer mislim, da kot družba nismo več zreli za ovakve odloke.
That's all we have time